Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this session. So this session is really about announcing the next generation of managed detection and response services, which is essentially a co-innovation project between Eviden and AWS. So Eviden has been in the MDR space for some time now. It's not a new space for us. It's about 7, 8 years when we launched this. We pioneered this space. So right now, we think it's the right time for disruption because there are changing customer requirements. There are, the threat landscape is changing. So without, spending too much time on the details right now, I'll get into the details as we get into the session. So let me hand it over to Gary to give a perspective on this co-innovation initiative and what this is really about.
Thank you. So those of you who were in the keynote yesterday, you noticed that one of the announcements that CJ Moses, our CISO, announced is what we call the Global Partner Security Initiative. And this Global Partner Security Initiative is all about AWS working with our partners to extend our security posture in areas that, frankly, we don't focus on because of our commitment to use foundational security. And what this is a very discrete, very prescriptive co-innovate, co-develop, co-market, and co-sell motion, where we providing two important components, which is our AWS Security Data Lake. And for those of you who have been focused on our Gen AI, what we call Bedrock, is we're going to provide these groundbreaking tools and these foundational tools. And through this co-development, co-investment model, we're going to work with our pals and our partners at Eviden to build next generation services, actionable security data, Fusion Center, SOC. So it's truly a co-innovation, co-partner model. And we're really excited to have Eviden as one of our first launch partners.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. So, with that, I will get into details of what this offering is all about. So the offering is called AIsaac Cyber Mesh. It's really about building on the CSMA model, which is the cybersecurity mesh architecture, which Gartner came up with about a year back in terms of integrating devices better. And AWS is really instantiating that in the market with the OCSF framework, which is really a practical way of having a common format to bring together all the different devices, whether it is cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid, data center infrastructure. So it's built on that framework, and all of the data that is collected comes into the Amazon Security Lake, and we have analytics on top of that to be able to provide better outcomes for our customers. So it kind of marries into the exabyte scale of AWS and leveraging the Amazon Security Lake. So that's, in a nutshell, what the offering is all about. But to get into details, what's really driving this disruption? Why is it that both AWS and Eviden are thinking alike in terms of seeing that there is a different way of looking at this space? The customer drivers are really coming from here. So if you look at today, detection is not, really enough for kind of keeping pace with all the different cyber breaches that are happening. It's also important to understand what is the exposure on which the attacks are happening. So are there unmanaged assets? Are there, exposed vulnerabilities? Is there data on the darknet? Are card data of a financial customer exposed? So the exposure management becomes a key piece, married with looking at the events of attacks that are happening. So it's a good 360-degree view that a customer requires. And on top of that, it's not just enough when you're looking at exposures, because there is a significant left shift that customers want to do in terms of also looking at proactively how do you secure, or how do you, prevent this with being able to drive policies into the infrastructure. So if you find some exposures, how do you fix it by a centralized policy push kind of approach? So that's one big change that is happening in the market. The other side is, we have been doing response for a lot of breaches as we detect attacks. but it's very clear that customers also want to recover fast. And when you say recover, it means that along with response, there are a set of activities to be done towards bringing business back in as quickly as possible. So as part of this offering, we are also adding on the recovery management aspects, the base set of things that is required to bring back business operations. So that's again a key part of this offering. And we also have the posture management, which means when you have a breach and certain things needs to be fixed, initially the root cause points towards X number of things to be done on those devices. But the idea is how do you expand this posture across the enterprise? So that is again critical to really back to normal operations thing. So the posture management also kind of adds on to the response management. And today in the world of generative AI, it's very clear that with less cybersecurity skill sets and the increasing number of assets or the digital estate to be managed, it's important that we kind of lean back on generative AI to leap forward towards how do you do more automated response, where the security analysts really have generative AI as a piece that kind of helps them to handle the complexity and scale of attacks that are happening. So there is a shift from looking at AI for detection and moving into also the automated response side of things. The other thing that is been happening in the last 2-3 years is security is definitely at the board level, and the language that CISO speaks is not always understood by board. So instead of just dashboards, we are really talking about how do you articulate what's happening in cyber into a business view. I have an example of that which I'll cover as part of future slides. And security is very quickly becoming vertical, so it's not a horizontal offering anymore. Take manufacturing, OT security has become critical. Take healthcare, IOMT becomes critical. Take financial services, business application monitoring, looking at ATMs, looking at core banking, looking at internet banking, and all those application side of things becomes critical. So it's not about a horizontal offering anymore. It's also really about a verticalization of the offering. And finally, there are a lot of security products today, like I explained initially. There is a real need to move from a very proprietary kind of integration to an industry standard format for integration. And that's really where Amazon Security Lake and the Open Cyber Security Framework, or OCSF of AWS, comes into picture. It's really a way of practically implementing the cyber mesh architecture, because we have in AWS OCSF about 100 plus vendors who have already bought into this. So it could become an easy way of kind of integrating in future. So it's really about higher security outcomes by bringing together the existing security investments as against fighting with so many different products, and how do you maximize from each product. So that's the other key change. So in terms of what we are bringing in new, or all these things that we just discussed now, maybe I'll just ask Gary to give some, his views in terms of anything else that he thinks is relevant in this.
So I think the combination and the power of Eviden and Atos is solving some what I would call highly strategic business problems in the industry. One, there's just not enough people. And as folks look towards outsourcing and managed services, we're going to scale through our partners. And the opportunity to work with you to be able to scale is very easy. Second, we will provide the underlying framework. We are not going to build the analytics. We're not going to take your data and make your data available to anyone else. So I think the fact that we're going to enable you through the AWS Security Data Lake is going to be another important component. And then I think ultimately the concept of autonomous security. When you get a breach, there's too much dependency. Do you have the right data? Do you know where the data is? Do you have a single lens into that data? Are you chasing false positives? And being able to take that and automate it with less human intervention and using Gen AI to create repeatable scenarios. I think working with you guys, and if we're here next year, I think we're starting to deliver on two promises. Well, three. Less people, actionable security, and autonomous security. So that's what I'm excited we're going to do over the next 12 months.
Thanks, Gary. So, catching on two things that Gary said, autonomous security and using the existing framework of AWS. So, this is really about how we are building AI responders. To see it simply, it's like the ChatGPT equivalent interface for responding to attacks. So AWS announced, last month the Amazon Bedrock framework for generative AI, and we are building on top of that in terms of building in these responder bots, which can actually assist the analysts in terms of automating the response when we are faced with complex attacks. It could be, assistance in terms of investigating the attack. It could be a response in terms of understanding the complexity of a network and then knowing what are the right steps to take. So the response part is a key part, and that's going to be a high differentiator as we move forward. Detection with predictive analytics is a given, and it's already part of our offering in MDR. But being able to use it for high-scale response is a big change. And we also talked about how do you articulate all these different things at the board level. So if you really look at the unified real-time business risk visualization piece, what we are talking about is dashboards are already there in the security industry, but the boards don't really understand it. It's one thing to say so many security incidents were managed, but it's not really quantifying anything. So the whole idea is how do you really take it from saying that I have X number of OT devices that are impacted. I'm just taking an example of manufacturing. So you could have a plant, a lot of OT devices could get impacted, but it doesn't mean anything at the board level. So what we are really saying is, because of certain OT devices getting ransomware or getting impacted by a security incident, there is an impact at a plant level that could impact a supply chain level. There could be an impact at the data center level. But all of this together could actually lead to a certain business risk view, which is there is a certain delay in terms of manufacturing, could be a car, could be any kind of goods. So the idea at the board level is how do you really quantify all these security incidents to know what is the final business impact that we are looking at. So that really is again a key part of what we are building. So in a nutshell, at summary level, we are moving from an MDR into a mesh architecture, which is the next-gen services that we are launching. And this is how it looks. Just as an explanation of how this whole thing is going up. At the lower level, we have the connector layer, which is basically the OCSF framework in action, which can collect from all kinds of devices. We said digital estate. It could mean multi-cloud, hybrid, all kinds of security technologies that are there in an environment, on an enterprise. And all of this moves up into the Amazon Security Lake for storage. And a lot of threat intel data also gets collected at that level. And on top of that, we are applying different types of analytics. So one is the predictive analytics for detection. We are adding on exposure management to understand what is the exposure for an organization. We are also adding on the identity intelligence into it, which means because today with all the perimeters gone, identity is become a core of protection. So understanding the user behavior, risk scoring users based on how the identity is getting used. So early on, we can identify any attack that is getting emanated. And on top of that, we have the response layer, which is what we discussed in terms of using generative AI towards an hyper response articulation, automation using the generative AI piece. And recovery management, of course, is part of that layer. And right on top, we have the business risk visualization, which can quantify things for the absolute quantification at the board level and management level, where risk visualization is happening like what we saw as an example. So this in a nutshell is a new offering that we have and that we are releasing to the market. Thank you.